more in the newsroom. Suddenly, we've gone from the brink of Western intervention in Syria and a Cold War-like standoff with Moscow to a potential breakthrough at the UN Security Council. France, but also the US and Britain, set to pick up on a Russian offer to safeguard the stockpiling of weapons and later table a resolution there in New York. We're going to look at the fine print, whether Russia would agree to binding resolutions that allow the use of force if Syria refuses to comply. Looks like the short answer is no. With or without chemical weapons, the bloodletting in Syria continues at a rate of 165 killed a day since the start of the conflict 2.5 years ago. Under such circumstances, is the stockpiling of chemical weapons even feasible? Is it feasible for the U.S. president to even ponder striking, as Barack Obama gets set to address a war-weary nation in prime time this Tuesday? The Russian initiative, enough for the Senate's Democratic leadership to delay a Wednesday vote on U.S. intervention, even though Obama's top cabinet members on Capitol Hill again this Tuesday warning the U.S. won't wait for long. Many wonder if either way, NATO bases like the one in 100 kilometers from the border in Turkey will ultimately remain idle. Would it be the victory of diplomacy or a sign of weakness that would come back to haunt the West? Today in the France 24 debate, will it work or is it too late for diplomacy? With us to talk about it, from Beirut, the Guardian's Middle East Correspondent Marty Marty. Thanks for joining us. Just back from near Aleppo. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also with us, activist Ahmed NAJI. He was arrested twice before fleeing his native Syria in July of 2012 and making his way here to Paris. Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to William Jordan, whose postings as a U.S. diplomat included Damascus, and Ahmed NAJI of Human Rights Watch, which has put out a report which we'll talk about a little bit later on during the show, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag F24debate. Now, the latest we have on the ground is that Russia's Vladimir Putin has said that Syrian chemical weapons handover plan will only work if the United States rejects the use of force. A bit of already, you could say, diplomatic wrangling. The Russian foreign minister earlier this Tuesday in front of the cameras reiterating he was nonetheless on board for facilitating a deal.
So, the complexity of factors, including the UN experts' report, should be taken into consideration when the UN Security Council debates this problem. The truth must be found, and the guilty have to face the consequences.
The Russian ambassador to Paris, though, confirms what the French foreign minister told lawmakers here earlier. Moscow will not go along with a resolution that imposes the use of force. Let's start with you, William Jordan. What's about to happen at the United Nations Security Council? Russia has vetoed I don't know how many resolutions so far regarding Syria. Right now already they're sort of setting conditions on what they will sign on to. Nonetheless, would you say that the developments of the past 24 hours are a good sign or a poor one?
I think they're a good sign in that we're back to diplomacy at the forefront in terms of trying to deal both with this immediate crisis over the chemical weapons issue. And I think, too, we're trying to deal with, the international community is now trying to deal with a chemical weapons issue on its face as opposed to potentially getting it all mixed up with everything else going on in Syria. And I think that the international community, particularly via the Security Council, needs to be the forum for trying to figure out how to deal with this immediate thing, despite all of the politicking that is still going on in Washington, the posturing that's still going on there, and the possibility still that the United States might act in some way. I think that diplomacy is to the fore, and that's where we ought to be on this.
All right. We can go, by the way, to France 24's correspondent Lucy Fielder, who is in Damascus and has been covering the story for us from there. Lucy, frenzy of activity going on in all the Western diplomatic chancelleries, at the UN Security Council. In Damascus, what's foremost on people's minds this Tuesday?
Well, we've been out and about speaking to people this afternoon, and there's an enormous sense of relief. One man told that he'd cried with his family when he'd heard the news, and that they'd been fearing a US strike and really sensing that war was imminent. So we've been hearing this from a lot of people, but also some skepticism, a sense, one woman told me, it's all a big political power game. We can't stand up to these giants. We're a small country, and even as Syrian citizens, politics goes on without us. We have no say in it. So a sense of powerless, a slight fear that this is only one latest twist in the whole ongoing debate. People don't feel that it's impossible that there'll be war. People still feel it's possible that there'll be a strike. But for the moment, there is a sense of relief, and at least that this has been pushed further away and possibly averted.
Since you've been in Damascus, Lucy, you've told us about how there's this sort of distant thud of shelling that you can hear. What's it like today?
Today it has been a lot calmer in the center of Damascus, at least. But the violence doesn't completely stop, and even over the last 24 hours, we've heard the continuation of bombardment across around the Damascus suburbs. Last night we were up in Jabal Qassim, the mountain above Damascus, and it was very strange to see the city all lit up and then a band of darkness around the city. And someone told me that's what we call the hot zone, and he explained that is the Damascus suburbs, those areas that have no power, that are virtual ghost towns, and we could hear the thud of shells landing as we were standing there. So no real let up. It's been calmer this afternoon, but still the bombardment of those areas, particularly Ma'adamir and Daraya over the last 24 hours, and the clashes between troops and the rebels that remain there continue.
Lucy Fielder, many thanks for that update from Damascus. As Lucy was speaking, you were seeing images of fighting from the north of the country, from Idlib. And again, picking up on what Lucy described as people in Damascus sort of wary, wondering if this is just a hiatus or whether they can breathe a little easier. Listening to what William Jordan is saying, that finally, at least, there seems to be some diplomacy has come to the fore. How about you? Do you feel, are you more optimistic than you were 24 hours ago?
No, actually I was looking at this 3 days big play. I don't think that the Syrian people could be breathed before this regime brought to the international court. I mean, as we have Assad regime, as we have no politics, no guarantees, no breathe. Nothing will be useful. I mean, it's only a time that the Assad is taking, and he still has the Joker card. So,
all right. So you don't trust him to comply with anything that'll take place. One of since we've had this frenzy of activity, since there has been this threat of intervention, and I'll put it to you, Martin CHULOV, is that Syria is high on everyone's minds, and it's forced the rest of the news into second place. Do you feel as though, after so much sudden frenzy of activity, of attention, that something must be done, something will happen, there will be some kind of breakthrough somehow?
It does feel like that. I mean, the tension has built to such a crescendo at this point that it does feel as though there is something coming which is going to tip the balance one way or another. I mean, I'm in Beirut today, and this city is very much feeling the effects of the war in Syria, as we all know, as it is feeling the effects of the diplomatic discussions over the last couple of weeks, and the belligerent rhetoric coming from a number of players here. If something does happen in Damascus, there will be a fallout in Beirut, no doubt about that. And I've spent most of the past week in Aleppo, in and around the countryside and the city itself, and there very clearly is a palpable tension amongst the opposition communities in that part of the country as well. There was nothing else discussed about other than, will the Americans attack? If they do, who will their targets be? Will they be coming for us, or will they be going for the regime? It's just so consistent now that it really has reached some sort of a breaking point.
And Martin, spokespeople for the Free Syrian Army, whose headquarters are based, the Syrian National Coalition, whose headquarters are based abroad, expressing deep disappointment at the fact that, for instance, the U.S. Congress is hitting the pause button on passing that resolution. Of the people you've seen, be it in Lebanon or in Syria, Are there people who are for Western intervention?
Oh, absolutely, and certainly in Syria, amongst the opposition communities, the more mainstream rebel groups are all for it. They were enthusiastically welcoming it, or the prospect of it, last week. I spent 4 or 5 days with them, and they were cheerfully picking up targets and hoping that the Americans would also go for some of the jihadist elements that are now quite prominent among them. They believed that if the US Air Force did attack regime targets, certainly the ballistic missile base just north of Damascus that continues to fire missiles into the north of the country, then that would give them a tactical gain. It would be more than just a morale boost. It would allow them to advance, because the war in the north has certainly descended into a grinding stalemate with neither side, the opposition or the regime, able to move forward. And this was seen, the potential of airstrikes was seen as something which could have changed that.
Ahmed NAJI, your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that we are now at the moment where this stalemate might come to an end. I agree with that. And in that perspective, from that perspective, I think it's extremely...
But to Martin CHULOV's point that there are those people inside of Syria who are hoping for those airstrikes, thinking it could change the balance.
I agree. From everything we know from the opposition, there are definitely people inside Syria and outside Syria who believe that the strikes are the answer. Whether it's the answer is a much bigger question. I think in the long run, everybody understands that the strikes are not going to resolve anything, that the strikes are just a way to enforce political negotiation, transition to some kind of peaceful resolution. And we as an organization have not taken a position. I think now we are, as everybody else, are watching very closely what's going to happen with Russia's proposal. And the biggest question in everybody's mind is whether it's just delaying tactics or whether there is something serious to be discussed there.
William Jordan, what would you answer to those people that spoke to Martin CHULOV? Because you've been skeptical about the concept of airstrikes. What would you answer to them? With say, come on, guys, do it.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I've said on this platform before, and I repeat it again, it is not up to the West, it is not up to the United States to deliver the Syrian people from their misery and from this horrible situation that they're in. They have to do it themselves. I mean, the West can help, understanding that is bringing help from Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, for the regime. I mean, the idea that somehow this can all be handled neatly, surgically, and through outside military intervention is a fundamental misunderstanding of the basic root issues in the Syrian conflict, in my opinion. And they belie any understanding of Syria's history and the problems in the regime and the problems that are manifesting themselves very clearly on the opposition side in terms of trying to figure out what the future of Syria after you get past the Assad regime would be.
All right, so for the time being, that's not how you see it. Which brings us back to the issue of diplomacy now and what's being tabled at the Security Council. Earlier on Breakfast Radio, the French foreign minister set out what the French see as being essential in that resolution before the Security Council.
We set at least 3 conditions after I met with the President François Hollande on Monday. Firstly, there must be a commitment to control and then destroy the weapons stock, not only that of the Russians, but also that of the Syrians. Secondly, this commitment must be binding, meaning that if it isn't respected, there have to be sanctions. And thirdly, there has been a chemical massacre, which Ban Ki-moon calls a crime against humanity, which has to be punished. That's where the International Criminal Court comes in.
Ahmed NAJI, your reaction to that?
Actually, I see the French government now in trouble. Big trouble, and I see that they are in this trouble because they looked at what's going on from the political window and the humanitarian window. Yes, but the United States, I think, till now they are looking from the political window as well as the Russian and Chinese. So now,
but those conditions laid out by the Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius.
It does nothing. I mean, any kind of, if they want to plug up or plug out the chemical precursors, or they want to watch it. Both of these solutions take a lot of time. I'm talking about years, and the experts know about this. I mean, so
all right,
everything will be continued.
Martin CHULOV, listening to Laurent Fabius speaking on Breakfast Radio here in Paris. You're just back from northern Syria. Does he seem out of touch with the reality that you saw?
I think that there certainly is an expectation in the north that there will be some form of punishment against who carried out this act. That is very important, that the natural justice element is significant, and also that there is a sense of accountability as well for any regime figures that did in fact do this. And binding sanctions are seen as something that could actually play some sort of a significant role. But the issue is, as my colleagues have discussed, is that this could play out for many, many years. This is a time frame thing. This could be perceived as a stalling tactic, more so than a means to a solution. And if that were the perception in the north, that is going to do nothing other than to inflame what is already a catastrophic situation.
Ahmed NEISTAT?
Well, I actually think that the proposal makes sense. And yes, it will be extremely difficult under the current circumstances with the ongoing conflict to put any kind of control. But I think part of the proposal is calling out Russia's bluff. And I think what we're seeing now, I think the latest news line that we're just coming in is that Russia is already uncomfortable with taking this to the Security Council. And I think the accountability bit is probably the most important part.
So should they take out then, in view of what you're saying, should the resolution maybe get rid of the part that makes it binding, the ability to use force, what they call in the UN Chapter 7, and so that the Russians do sign on, or do they put Russia in front of their...
Well, I see this a little bit differently in the sense that I actually think that this is the opportunity that the U.S. has needed, the West has needed, to actually get the Russians to agree to the Chapter 7 applicability. I mean, we have to wait for the UN inspectors to make their report, and hoping that it's not going to be completely wishy-washy.
But we've already heard a statement from the office of the Russian president this Tuesday saying we don't want it to be the use of force to be in that resolution.
Well, maybe not the use of force, but Chapter 7 doesn't always necessarily imply use of force. I mean, you could make it a Chapter 6, which is sort of what it is now.
And he's adding, may I say, that the United States must openly reject the use of force.
That is going to be problematic for the Obama administration. Again, I think it's too soon. I mean, there's a certain amount of posturing by the different parties concerned. I think we have to get to New York and hear the UN weapons inspectors and see what that leads the diplomacy
where that leads. We're going to pick up on that point when we come back. This is the France 24 debate.